We have enough?
Is 5 a quorum?
We need 6.
We can keep going. We have 6. Yeah, we're good. We're good to go. Item
Okay.
24, Teresa.
Wonderful. Thank you, Commissioner. Item 24 is an information item. This is the presentation of staff recommendations for the 2018 STIP. Statute requires that staff recommendations be made available to the Commission, Caltrans, and regional agencies at least 20 days prior to STIP adoption. On February 28th, staff released staff recommendations for the 2018 STIP and were distributed via email and posted on the Commission's website. A hard copy of the staff recommendations was provided to each Commissioner. The 2018 STIP covers a 5-year period from 1819 through 22-23, adding the last 2 years of new programming. The development of the 2018 STIP began with the adoption of the 2018 STIP guidelines and the fund estimate in August 2017. The fund estimate identified approximately $2.2 billion in new STIP programming capacity. Added to the base, which is the first 3 years of the STIP, the 2018 STIP will program about $3.3 billion to projects. The staff recommendations have been crafted to program the capacity available by fiscal year, consistent with the adopted fund estimate. Where staff recommendations differ from the original RTIP and ITIP request, the change is indicated by shading in the spreadsheets. The 2018 STIP staff recommendations are based primarily on the following: programming targets identified in the fund estimate, especially the minimum targets for the share period ending in 1920. Project priorities as presented in the RTIPs and the ITIP, and the Commission policies and priorities as expressed in the STIP guidelines. In general, staff recommendations resulted in the following. Except for a few projects, all project proposals received from the RTIPs and the ITIPs are included in staff recommendations. This was possible because total proposals were below the capacity identified in the fund estimate. The recommendations also include new PPM, programming, programming and monitoring within the statutory limits. And to the extent possible, existing projects remain in the year program, except when requesting significant cost increases in funding. For those projects, we had to delay the projects. Advances to existing projects were also considered, and to the extent capacity allowed, staff recommended them. New projects were recommended for programming in later years of the STIP, except for agencies that only proposed new projects to meet their county minimum. And $178 million in advanced project development element are included. This will allow agencies to start project development on new projects. Since staff recommendations were released, staff has developed a list of changes and corrections. These are outlined in attachment B and C under item 25. Since the book was published, we have made additional changes to those attachments. The revised attachments are included as a yellow in your package. Staff recommendations are constrained by fiscal year based on the amounts identified in the fund estimate. There is a small capacity remaining in the last year of the STIP, mostly to cover cost increases. Therefore, if we are to make any changes, like add or advance one or more projects, we need to have a compensating deletion or delays in other projects to stay within the fund estimate limits. After adoption of the 2018 STIP, there will likely be the need for more technical changes and corrections. As with past STIPs, the proposed resolution includes a clause that would authorize staff in consultation with Caltrans and regional agencies to make further technical changes, with all substantive changes to be brought back to the Commission for approval. Letters received from stakeholders regarding staff recommendations are attached to this book item, including those received after the book was published. These are in purple in your package. In conclusion, I would like to thank Juan Guzman for agreeing to come out of retirement and help with the STIP. His excellent work in the preparation of staff recommendations were invaluable. I would also like to thank Mitch Wise, my Chief Deputy Director, for his mentorship throughout the STIP development. I would also like to thank all the regional agencies and Caltrans for working with us throughout the development of the recommendations. As you recall, when this first started, when we received all the RTIPs, we were 500 million above the capacity identified in the first 2 years. Together, we worked to get those 2 years aligned, and their efforts, understanding, and flexibility is greatly appreciated. And that concludes my remarks, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
You have questions?
I just want to commend Teresa. I know this has been a Herculean effort on your part. Thank you.
Okay, I have some public comments on item 24. Therese? Therese McMillan, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I want to thank the CTC staff for their efforts in developing the 2018 STIP. Also, it's a delight to be here and see so many of you again now that I'm back in California, and look forward to working with you. With the 2018 RTIP submittal that Metro brought forward, we worked very closely with your staff to sequence our projects in a manner that helps create capacity for the CTC to adjust and develop and assign projects. I know that's a Herculean task. We support the recommendations that your staff had made in that regard. However, what we'd like to also highlight is that in order for us to continue to deliver our projects on a schedule that we think we can, we would like to take advantage of the tools such as AB 3090, and we'll be coming forward to you in May with some requests to make use of that to keep our projects moving as quickly as possible. Overall, we applaud the CTC in moving forward with the adoption of the 2018 STIP and the SHOP, in spite of the action of the Board of Equalization that injected some uncertainty into the financial circumstances. But we believe that it's critically important to continue moving forward and to illustrate this very important first step of implementing SB1. We at Metro are very excited about the opportunity to recognize some immediate benefits with that. As part of the STIP in Los Angeles County, this would include the completion of the State Route 138 corridor, the construction of the East San Fernando Valley Transit Corridor, and the state of good repair of our bus fleet. And I think we're mirroring the equally important investments in reinvesting in our system in addition to expanding it. I also wanted to just comment on the recognition of the need for story. I had the pleasure of being down at Monterey at the CalCA conference with Commissioners Inman and Medaffer and with Executive Director Branson, where we had spent a lot of time on how important that's going to be, particularly now that SB1 is under threat. We actually are very committed to working with you as partners on telling that story of everyday Californians needing good roads and sidewalks and public transportation, and that the opportunity of bringing new transportation investment and highlighting the collective success and our accountability to stewardship is part of that story that we want to bring to Californians with projects both large and small. So we look forward to working with you, and again, I'm really excited to join you again. Thank you.
Thanks, Therese. And I think communication, we all take a class from Therese, and we'll be signing up there. So Ray, I'm not sure, are you item 24 or 25? 24, please. 24, please, okay. Ray.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I'm going to keep my comments brief. I just want to extend my appreciation, Ray Wolf of the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority, but I want to extend my appreciation for the collaboration that we've had in working with your staff in developing the 2018 STIP. I stood before you 2 years ago at a very difficult time in transportation. And at that time, you were readying to approve the 2016 STIP, which had a $754 million shortfall. While we all collectively shared in the pain, my organization was hit especially hard. And at the time, you as commissioners committed that given the opportunity, you would work to rectify that situation. And I just want to, again, thank Susan, thank Mitch, thank Juan, and thank Teresa for their efforts because you did deliver on your commitment. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we will move on then to item 25.
Commissioners, item 25 is an action item. Staff recommends the commission adopt the 2018 STIP consistent with the attached resolution, noting any specific changes, corrections, or exceptions as noted in attachment B and C to the February 28, 2018 staff recommendations. Staff recommends your approval.
We have a motion by Commissioner Tavaloni, a second by Commissioner Dunn. Any discussion, commissioners? Okay, I have 2 public comments. Jose Luis?
Yes, I represent SACOG, that's Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba counties. And same as you've heard before, I really want to commend your staff and also some Caltrans staff. Teresa, Juan, and am I missing out? And Mitch, excuse me. It takes a lot of work to develop these, the region's RTIPs, and it takes as much or more work to review those RTIPs, and inevitably we get something wrong. And it takes incredible attention to detail for these staff plus Caltrans staff, Eric Zeklin, to review this and help us figure out where we might have made mistakes. Thanks to this, our agencies are going to be able to deliver their projects on time and accurately. So just wanted to thank your staff, and we, SACOG recommends approval of this item too. Thank you.
Thank you. Kenneth?
Thank you, Commissioners. Kenneth Cow, MTC. I don't know about Jose, but we never make any mistakes, so we're fine. No, I wanted to echo as well all the previous comments. Thank you very much to Teresa and Juan and Mitch, I guess, and Eric at Caltrans. I think we work really well. We have great communication, and we support staff's recommendation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kenneth. Any further discussion? Okay, we have a motion on the floor. All in favor? Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining for the record? Motion carries. Congratulations. Susan, did you want to say something?
Thank you.
And, thank you, Madam Chair. I did want to add to the thanks. And Teresa, I see you in the office, and I know, you just have taken on so much with the STIP and the solutions for congested corridors at the same time, always with a spirit of, I can do this, and don't worry, everything's going to be all right. And, Teresa, just thank you for your work on this. You did an outstanding job.
Good job.
Thanks. And I want to thank Ray also for reminding us of that dark day 2 years ago with that STIP fund estimate reduction, and to thank our legislature and our governor and everybody who helped us get SB1, because we're now able to have this discussion and have these new guidelines and move forward. So proud of everybody working together. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to item 26. Garth?
Commissioners, tab 26 is an informational item, and SB1 identified a total of $7 million per year for research and workforce development efforts. Out of that effort, the University of California receives $5 million that is statutorily required to be used to conduct transportation research, and the California State University system receives $2 million annually for transportation research and transportation-related workforce education. These funds will help ensure that California maintains its competitiveness in the transportation research field. Dr. Stephen Ritchie, the director of the University of California at Irvine Institute of Transportation Studies, will be providing an overview of the UC's efforts to utilize these funds for research activities. Staff also had invited a representative from the California State University system to provide a similar overview. However, unfortunately, CSU was unable to send a representative due to state scheduling conflicts. Dr. Karen Philbrook, the executive director of the Mineta Institute at the San Jose State University, did provide some summary information on CSU's plans to utilize these SB1 funds. The Mineta Transportation Institute has been designated as the lead to lead the CSU consortium for this effort. Last January, the CSU Transportation Consortium released a request for proposals to all 23 CSUs. Proposals were due on February 26th. A total of 83 proposals were received from 18 campuses covering a wide range of transportation research and transportation workforce development issues. Each proposal could not exceed $75,000. CSU expects that successful proposals will be announced sometime mid to late April. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Ritchie.
Great. Thank you, Garth, and good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Stephen Ritchie. I'm Chair of the UC ITS Council of Directors, and we appreciate this opportunity to briefly provide an overview of both ITS and our SB1 funded research program. The overriding mission of ITS, the Institutes of Transportation Studies, is to be the premier university-based transportation research and education center in the world. We have 4 branches at Berkeley, Davis, Irvine, and UCLA. We have some 143 faculty across those campuses engaged in transportation research. We currently have 340 graduate students pursuing advanced degrees that are affiliated with ITS. In fiscal 16-17, our expenditures were $50 million. So as an institution, ITS is a little over 70 years old. We were created by the state legislature in 1947. Initially at Berkeley, and around that time the state provided core funding for operational purposes of about $980,000. That amount stayed constant for 70 years. In 2017 dollars, that would have been equivalent to $11 million, or on a per capita basis, about $42 million. Over the subsequent years, several more branches were created, and in 2016, a UC ITS Council of Directors was established via a memorandum of understanding with the UC Office of the President to better coordinate system-wide ITS activities. The same year, ITS received a one-time $3 million augmentation from the PTA Public Transportation Account for transportation research serving the state, and in 2017, SB1 passed and provided an annual augmentation of $5 million, and we're most appreciative to Assemblymember Frazier, Senator Bell, and Secretary Annis for their support in that regard. So the functions of ITS are varied. We attract and conduct extramurally funded research at the cutting edge. We provide stewardship of a multitude of educational programs across the UC system that educate our future leaders in transportation in a variety of disciplines, and we provide support for a large number of graduate and undergraduate students. We also engage with government and industry partners in organizing various conferences, seminars, and briefings on transportation issues critical to the state, amongst others. Our SB1 research program organizational structure is shown here. We have 3 designated advisors, the Secretary of Transportation and the chairs of the Assembly and Senate transportation committees. With their approval, we also have a 19-member board of advisors. The list of folks that are on that board are on a handout that I believe you have. Under those groups, we have the Council of Directors that I mentioned, which is 4 ITS directors. The chair is a rotating position annually. I'm the current chair until June 30th. The various ITS branches have assistant and/or associate directors and administrative staff supporting this effort. And just recently, we appointed, with SB1 funds, a system-wide assistant director, Laura Podolsky, based in Sacramento, to facilitate engagement and coordination of our activities. So the SB1 research program, as you know, is $5 million annually. Of that, roughly $200,000 is reserved for research at non-ITS UC campuses to encourage development of transportation research activities beyond the existing ITS branches. Several key elements are that the research that is funded must address California priorities and policies. It must identify and engage with one or more public sector stakeholders, and every funded project must have a letter, at least one letter of support from such partners. The research is selected through a competitive RFP process on each campus. So this shows the priorities on the left of this slide, 6 priorities, and then several projects are in the area of translational research in our 2017-18 program, which is just getting underway. To date, some 44 projects have been selected. We'll probably end up with roughly 50 within the next month or so that will be underway for this year. The pie chart shows the distribution amongst those 6 areas, and the handout, some 25 or more pages that I believe you have, has descriptions of each of the 44 projects that were selected for funding this year. Going forward, for year 2 and subsequent years of the program, we plan to follow this schedule and the milestones shown here, and so far we're on track. In April, in the next couple of weeks, we'll be releasing an RFP for the coming fiscal year with the goal of having those projects start in August. And I'd be happy to entertain any questions if you have some.
Commissioner Dunn?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question on the research priorities here. One of the things that I was struggling with in my day job is folks that work in other states use other materials and methodologies that may extend bridge decks, may extend the life of roads, that are very hard to get through approval processes in California. Granted, we have earthquake issues and things like that. Are some of the priorities here looking at products and methodologies that other states are using that we could then extend the life of our SB1 funding and be more efficient in California? Not yet, huh?
Well, no. One of the efforts relates to the Pavement Research Center, which is a joint effort between Berkeley and Davis. And that group is very focused on practices and procedures that would benefit California, but draws on national practice as well as local policies and procedures. So that's certainly one clear one, I believe, that would do that. In the bridge area, I'm not familiar with an effort so far.
Okay.
In data collection and highway data collection, for example, the feds require data for highway performance management system, HPMS. One of our projects that came out of the previous cycle, the PTA-funded projects, about a $50,000 project, identified the ability to implement technology that was developed at Irvine, actually, that could save some $19 million for Caltrans over the next 20 years. So that draws upon national, actually international knowledge for that matter, but which was pioneered here in Orange County.
I appreciate that, and I'll talk offline without taking commission time away, but I do know of one example of a product that came for testing in Davis, and then the minute it got through the process, and started going through testing, Davis runs out of money. And so now the product just sits there and we've lost an opportunity until, and I may be mixing apples and oranges in this conversation with you, but I just know that there are things that we could probably, being the center of excellence that California is in innovation, take a look at some of those things.
I would agree. One of the great benefits of this funding, assuming it does continue in
Correct.
perpetuity, is that it gives us greater ability to plan for the future. We have an RFP every year, and so the folks that are engaged in those activities can submit proposals and seek funding through this effort, as well as, for example, through Caltrans, but certainly with probably greater certainty of receiving support through this program.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Gometti?
Thank you. So we're giving UC $5 million annually. We're going to give CSU $2 million annually. Is it possible to get an annual report on your research results? If you could come and meet with us once a year and tell us what's going on.
We'd be very happy to do that. With respect to our January and also Board of Advisors meetings, we basically prepare materials that summarize all those efforts that have occurred in the previous year. We're not currently required to generate an annual report, but we're certainly discussing it, and we're actually proposing to do that would integrate all the project results together. So we'd be very happy to do that.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Stephen, I realize I missed the advisory meeting. I think it was another transportation day. Hey, every day's a freight day. No. But I really, I'm looking for the right word here. Interested to think about our agendas and our funding streams and the proportion of time and money. And is our research aligned with that? And so I'll bring up the freight sector, and you know where I'm going with this. You've heard me forever. Talk about, as we look to reduce our emissions, clearly we know the heavy-duty sector, we need a large migration. And to get there, we need some good research because we need to make really good decisions. And so when I look at this list, I'm thinking, well, you all picked from whatever list you had, but, are we in alignment, I guess, is the question in terms of the problem we're trying to solve and the amount of investments we're making and the research we're doing. And I think that the freight sector hasn't been the most popular research topic necessarily at our universities. I think, I see the University of Tennessee, MIT, you know the names as well as I do, where they've really made a real strong name for their kind of freight research. So how can we make sure that where we're spending our time and our resources, we're talking to each other and we're in alignment, so to speak, because I would argue that a lot of the research we need really quickly so that we can integrate it. We had I don't know if you were here earlier in the day, but we had a presentation on disruptive trends, and it showed us vehicle miles traveled, a delta of, double one. If you miss one number, you could go twice that. So those have huge impacts for the decisions that we're making. So how can we better get all of our transportation partners here talking to you all on a regular basis in terms of problems they're trying to solve?
So these are issues that are all of great interest to us, and as you know, at Irvine, but also across the UC system. The alignment that we have is really in terms of the priorities with Senator Bell and Assemblyman Frazier, who, both of whom are very concerned in what they've expressed to us in terms of emphases on freight and urban goods movement, impacts on disadvantaged communities, and the environmental impacts. We also have the advisory board, and it's through those inputs that really the priorities are identified. The 6 or so that are on that slide I know are very general. There's actually a somewhat more detailed list of 10 or so. And in terms of engagement beyond that group, what we've been doing is holding some, in fact, you were a participant in one of those last year, open meetings in Sacramento, for instance, policy briefings, and that sort of thing. One of the things that distinguishes this program from business as usual, if you like, in terms of the research that we've done in the past, is really the desire to achieve a greater level of engagement. So we welcome that. We'd like to see more of that. And I think it's really a pressing need, especially in the freight area. So we'd be very happy to engage to a greater degree. But the priorities are a reflection of the legislature and CalSTA.
Well, as a starting point, maybe I could suggest that you sit down with our executive director, Branson, and maybe kind of brainstorm together, because I think it would be good for all of us to
that'd be
see how
great.
we can mutually benefit from these.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's all I was going to say was we need to harmonize these two documents.
Sorry, Paul.
That's okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Item 27?
Thank you. Commissioners, tabs 27, 20, and 29 are related action items on the Transportation Asset Management Plan. Commissioners may recall that the Transportation Asset Management Plan was presented at the January 2018 Commission meeting for approval. At that meeting, the Commission conditionally approved the Transportation Asset Management Plan with these two conditions. One, receipt of performance targets for each of the 9 supplementary asset classes. And 2, receipt of benchmarks for the primary asset classes of pavement, bridges, drainage systems, and transportation management systems. Tab 27 is an action item for that first item, the approval of performance targets for each of the 9 supplementary asset classes. Commission staff has reviewed the supplementary asset performance targets and recommends Commission approval. Before action, Mr. Michael Johnson, Caltrans Asset Manager, has a short presentation on this item and is available to answer your questions.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners. Thank you. This will be very brief. I think Rick summed it up very well. We have had these supplemental asset class targets for many years, actually, prior to the implementation of Senate Bill 486 and bringing them before the Commission. These were included in the State Highway System Management Plan that came before the Commission last year, and they were also included in the draft TAMP Transportation Asset Management Plan that was brought before the Commission in October, again in December, and again in January. In the January meeting, there was some comment specifically about the presentation of the sidewalks and the ADA items. We got with staff and have come up with a maybe more intuitive presentation of that information. That's what you see here in the book item. I have a very short presentation, primarily for those in the audience. These are the supplemental asset classes. These are items that are important to the overall transportation system, but kind of fall in a tier below what we call the core asset classes: pavement, bridges, culverts, and traffic management system elements. But things like pump plants are important when it rains, like it will later tonight. If we don't have these things in place in a good state of repair, we could have highway implications. So in order to keep track of them and to weave them into our plan, the Commission guidelines and working with Caltrans included these 9 supplemental asset items. These items are all assessed in a little different way. Just as an example, the pump plants that I just mentioned, those are actually rigorously inspected by mechanical and electrical engineers, and they look at things like how many hours the pumps have run, how old they are, what kind of electrical draw they have. So it's very technical criteria, but they assess the condition of the pumps. In other items, like, for example, the office buildings, those are assessed generally through a consultant with the Department of General Services who go out. They have a very different assessment methodology that they use. But through these items, there is a criteria that we use to place them in these good, fair, and poor categories. Those assessment items are generally commensurate with the value of the asset, the feasible treatments that we have for these assets, and the level of investment that we have in the shop overall. So when we go to set the targets here, unlike pavement and bridge, we really don't have the ability to do very rigorous analysis here. We're really relying more on history and the subject matter experts that we have within Caltrans that manage each one of these programs. And so the targets that you have are those recommendations of these subject matter experts. And again, I don't say this to minimize the impact of these assets to the system, but to bring into context that these supplemental assets that we're talking about represent 4% of the 2018 SHOP investment, compared to 70 plus on the 4 core assets that we have traditionally talked about when we talk about asset management. So with that, here are the recommended performance targets, and we would like to move to a formal adoption of the asset management plan and request that the commission adopt these. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
I have a question from
Yeah.
Commissioner Paul.
So in the material that was provided, it talks about how this is through subject matter and expert judgment. How do we move from the subjective to the empirical? I guess, what are the guidelines that are statewide that says this building is a good building and that building is a fair building?
It's a good question. Thank you, Commissioner Van Kynendenberg.
I
I've
live
been
to ask you
practicing.
questions.
Pardon me?
I live to ask you
I
questions,
know,
Mike.
you do, and I appreciate them. The office buildings, for example, is an area where, we're trying to grow the maturity of asset management in California. We have a plan that we hopefully get full adoption on. We got federal certification last week. We're about 2 years ahead of the time frame that was allowed in 46. But it doesn't stop with the adoption of that plan. We're moving forward in a continuous improvement process, and the office building is a perfect example. We have to contract through Department of General Services for those assessments. We've done that for 6 office buildings in the state of California that we felt were kind of on that upper echelon of ones that would need action first in an attempt to get a prioritization of those things. When they go in to look at those buildings, they're looking at electrical systems, structural issues, seismic issues. They're looking at plumbing. They're looking at any potential asbestos that might be in these older buildings. It's quite an extensive checklist of things that they look at, and they come out with a score. And it's those scores that we're using to kind of give us that pecking order with respect to how we might go after office buildings, as one example.
So is the checklist uniform throughout the state?
It is.
And is that the same thing done with roadside rest areas?
Roadside rest has a different checklist, but it is uniform throughout the state.
And so you think it's empirical?
I think that it's the same group doing the assessment statewide on these things.
Okay, so it's the same, okay,
There's consistency there.
okay.
And each checkbox is obviously, but each checkbox is obviously to the individual that's doing the inspection. And you're gonna have some variance, unless you got one guy doing the whole thing. Statewide. Yeah, statewide.
So, Michael, can I ask you again? I know I asked this before, but our energy efficiency requirements are outside your scope of work here? Because we have goals in our state for energy efficiency, and I think particularly when it comes to our office buildings, we're going to have, I'm not sure, I'm not an engineer, but I'm guessing our Caltrans headquartered building is not zero net energy. So it's just a wild guess.
So certainly, we would see some advantages if we can work some of these older structures out of our inventory and bring in new LEED certified structures. And I think as we move into them, that's what we're looking to try to do. With respect specifically to the headquarters building, I believe it's 83 years old. It's a big building with a big lift with respect to the investment there, and we don't have any immediate plans there, but we did just get a refreshed assessment of that building and the issues that that building has, which that building is actually multiple buildings that have been kind of cobbled together over the years. And so you kind of have the new piece and the old piece, and they each have their own part of the assessment. But it's something that we're kind of putting our eye on longer term to try to develop a reasonable plan for these buildings, because they've somewhat taken a back seat to actual investment on the highway system itself. And, at some point, we need a strategy other than, wait for a crisis situation.
Well, and we do have energy efficiency requirements on our fleets too, so just want to make sure that we put them on somebody's list, because to the extent we have heavy-duty trucks in our fleet, right, Lori? I don't remember what the number is, but as we try to migrate some of those.
And separate from the asset management plan, but we do have a plan to upgrade our buildings to the extent possible. Some 83-year-old buildings a little more difficult, but to provide greater energy efficiency. And obviously we've been upgrading our fleet. Maybe you're not aware of that, but we've been upgrading our fleet for the last couple of years to provide more ZEV and hydrogen fuel vehicles.
Do we know where we are today on this score?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so will you be reporting that to us at some point? As a part of, I know there's ongoing reporting for the other asset targets. Will you be at some point saying, okay, today our drainage pumps are 50% good and, 10% are poor and 40% are fair, or something like that, or whatever they are?
Yes, sir. That information is all in the Transportation Asset Management Plan already.
Okay, I'll go back and look at that.
Okay, so this is an action item. Do we have a motion? Do I have a second? Motion by Commissioner Tavaloni, a second by Commissioner Dunn. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining for the record? Motion carries. Thank you, Michael. Okay, we will move on to item 28.
Commissioners, item 28 is an action item that addresses the second condition placed on the approval of the Transportation Asset Management Plan. This item is for the approval of annual performance benchmarks for the 4 primary asset classes: pavement, bridges, drainage systems, and transportation management systems. These benchmarks are essential in gauging annual progress to meeting 2027 10-year performance targets. Commission staff has reviewed the benchmarks and recommends commission approval. Mr. Michael Johnson, you're up.
Thank you. Again, I have a short presentation. Within the requirements of the Transportation Asset Management Plan, we actually have federal requirements that require a 2 and 4 year assessment of condition. We call them, in the context of this commission meeting, benchmarks. They're actually projections of where we anticipate the system condition to be in future years. So under federal regulations, we have to do a 2 and 4 year target. That covers only bridges and pavements, and it covers the entire national highway system. The department still has to do that work in working with our local partners, and we're going to be moving on to that here very shortly with an inquiry out to all the RTPAs and MPOs statewide and a webinar next week. But with respect to the commission's jurisdiction on the state highway system, the commission staff had asked us to develop a 10-year projection for the 4 core asset classes. So to do that, we utilize a 4-step process. It begins by taking the most recent known condition of each of the 4 assets. These come through pavement condition surveys or from bridge inspections. And then we apply deterioration to each of those assets in accordance with the models that we use for the State Highway System Management Plan to look at what we think the ongoing deterioration will be. And then we improve that condition through our project accomplishments. And that work is reflective of both the shop and highway maintenance programs together, which is following the approach that we use with the State Highway System Management Plan. In addition, we have to incorporate new inventory. New inventory can help you or hurt you depending on what the inventory is. As this commission's well aware, the department continues to build our culvert inventory, for example. And as we build that inventory, it's coming in a distribution of condition that would include some of them coming in poor condition. Opposite of that, or sort of diametrically opposed to that, we have TMS, which for the transportation management system elements that are being added to the system, they're all coming in brand new, and that has the effect of somewhat diluting the percentage that might be fair or poor. So this inventory thing is something that we had to consider quite a bit. Of these 4 steps, step 3 was actually the most challenging of all of it. And I'll explain why it was so challenging, because in effect, what the commission asked us to do is to look at this time frame 2017-18 through 26-27 and make a projection of what the project level accomplishments would be. In order to do this, we had to evaluate project level accomplishments for approximately 15 years worth of shop projects plus maintenance projects. In fact, we had to go back retroactively to prior shops to try to understand what the project level accomplishments were for projects that were allocated by this commission long before we thought about implementing a formal asset management plan. This was a big lift on the part of my team and our programs in pavement, bridge, culvert, and transportation management systems. One of the things that was challenging here is a discussion about when you take credit for work completed. And each of these green dots on this slide would indicate the award of an individual contract, and the red dot would indicate the end of the contract or closeout. And there's some point along that time duration where the public would begin to experience the benefit of this work. And depending on how long the number of working days or years, depending on the nature of the project, that could slide things around in time. So for example, the first project on the top there, that point might occur before this 10-year window started. And then one down on the very bottom that's somewhat crosshatched, we might start it within the 10-year window, but we wouldn't realize those benefits until we're outside of the 10-year window that we're working with. So this added quite a bit to the complexity of the analysis of what the public will experience in terms of the condition of the system. So this is sort of a graphical representation of how far we had to go back. In fact, we had to go back to the 2010 shop in some cases to look at projects to see how this all flows into and onto the highway system. With all of this work, there's a fair amount of uncertainty, and I'll explain how this comes into the graphs in a minute, but there's uncertainty in the inventory in some cases. For example, culverts. We are estimating a total inventory, and all of our analysis is based on that estimate, but if that estimate is off by a little bit, then our benchmarks might be off by a little bit. The growth of the TMS elements on the system is part influenced by Caltrans, but also in part influenced by our partners. And we don't have a great quantification of how much our partners are going to be imparting on the state highway system that then become the state's maintenance responsibility. So those are a couple of examples where inventory becomes a little uncertain. Measured condition is also a potential uncertainty in that, when we look at things like, how we're assessing the pavement and the accuracy of that, we see some slight variances from one year to the next. Even though we're doing it in an automated fashion, there's technical settings within how these things are all calibrated that can lead to some variances. Our whole analysis includes deterioration rates for each of these 4 asset classes. To the extent that those deterioration rates are revised over time, that could influence our projections going forward. And then certainly project accomplishments. I think you kind of got a glimpse of the complexity and the number of years of projects that we had to look at. The other thing is when we look at our maintenance programs, we're generally not programming these out 10 years. We're looking 2 years ahead at a time. So beyond a 2-year window in the future, we're having to look at average annual expected accomplishments as opposed to project-specific accomplishments. In addition, on the project accomplishment side, we had to look at each one of these projects to understand if the project was actually going to improve the condition. Because there are projects such as painting a bridge that is being done for a legitimate reason to preserve the steel that the bridge is constructed of, but that project in itself doesn't improve the condition. It protects the future condition. And so there was a lot of complexities here in this project accomplishment arena. So to try to bring all this in, we utilized an approach called the Monte Carlo simulation. And I won't get into all the technicals of the Monte Carlo simulation other than to say that it is intended to account for these varying degrees of uncertainty of these items. So this is the result that we have, and hopefully you all have a nice big sheet because you really need to see it full size to appreciate it. The lower 3 graphs represent good, fair, and poor condition for these 4 core asset classes. These shaded bands behind these lines, if you will, represent potential uncertainty. And you will notice that as we go through time, the uncertainty broadens out because things like deterioration rate, for example, you begin to compound it over time. So one of the recommendations that we have in our book item or embedded in our book item is, one, we're asking you to adopt the targets or the benchmarks, but we're also asking you to permit the department to come back on a biennial basis and refresh this analysis. And that's really the best way that we can minimize this uncertainty as we go through time by recorrecting. So these are all prospectively looking analysis. The department will also actually measure the condition of the system as we go through time. And that measured condition will lag approximately 2 years behind these projections. And it varies a little bit depending on the asset. But our hope is to be able to come in and say, okay, this is where we projected to be. And then as we go through time, we can come back and say, okay, this is where we actually measured our system to be, so that we can validate these assumptions that we've made and make corrections on this biennial update. So with that, I think the methodology is fairly straightforward. It's fairly easy to understand. Certainly the outcomes are a function of the starting condition, deterioration, and project accomplishments primarily. The good news is that we are on track with our project stream and strategies that the department is putting in place to achieve the SB1 performance targets by 2027. we talked about uncertainty, and because of that uncertainty, we're recommending that if you choose to adopt these benchmarks, that we also adopt and update frequency to them. That concludes my presentation.
Commissioner Paul?
Mike, thanks for your effort. I know this whole process, we challenged you to go further, and so congratulations to your team
Thank
for
you.
going further. I think this is a great beginning, and I think 2 years from now, you will know a lot more of what you don't know right now, and this will get a lot better, I assume, because right now you're still, I think you theoretically have an idea where this is going, and hopefully getting 2 years under your belt will give you some practicality. But thank you for your efforts. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Any other comments? Okay, this is an action item.
Second.
The motion by Commissioner Gometti, a second by Commissioner Paul V. Any further discussion? All in favor? Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining for the record? The motion carries. Thank you, Michael. Item 29, Rick?
Yes, Commissioners, item 29 is an action item for the approval of the Transportation Asset Management Plan. Based on the Commission's actions on items 27 and 28, the conditions placed by the Commission on the Transportation Asset Management Plan have been met. Commission staff recommends Commission approve the Transportation Asset Management Plan without conditions.
A motion by Commissioner Paul V, a second by Commissioner Tavallone. Any discussion on this? All in favor? Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 30 has been withdrawn. We will go to the information calendar. Stephen?
Yes, Commissioners, before we get to the information calendar, I'd like to comment on the asset management plan. This was a Herculean effort by the department. And on top of it, the legislature gave them until 2020 to accomplish this. They accomplished this 2 years early. So a big congratulations to Mike and his team and the department for getting this thing done. Now, on to the information calendar. The next 13 items, 31 through 43, are information items deemed by staff not to raise any issues. The individual items will not be presented unless requested by a commissioner. Hearing no requests, we can move on to the consent calendar. The consent calendar are in the next 17 items, items 44 through 60. There needs to be a couple of changes. Item 51 is being pulled from the consent calendar to be heard right after the consent calendar is taken up. And item 57 is also pulled from the consent calendar to be heard tomorrow when we have eight commissioners present. With that, staff recommends that you approve the consent calendar.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Tavallone, a second by Commissioner Paul V. Any discussion on this? All in favor? Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Motion carries. Okay, we have,
So
we're
Commissioners, now
going to
we,
go back to the item you pulled,
yes,
Steve?
to item 51. I believe a commissioner has some questions on this item. I think it's Jim Gilmetti.
Are we going to have a presentation or not?
Well, I can, staff can go ahead and give you an overview here real quick. Item 51 is an action item, and this is the final EIR for construction of a 1.3-mile paved bicycle and pedestrian trail adjacent to an existing rail line within the city of Santa Cruz. The city has adopted a mitigated negative declaration for this project and found that the project will not have a significant effect on the environment after mitigation. Staff recommends your approval.
I have questions.
Commissioner Gilmetti?
Rachel, you want to stand up there?
Yep.
I think it was in 1990, we approved Proposition 116, which basically was set aside by the voters to purchase rail lines so we could reintroduce rail service in various parts of the state. So I realized also that there was a combination of being able to do bicycle and pedestrian trails along with that rail acquisition. What I have before us is just a trail, and I'm really kind of curious is where's the rail element after all these years?
Sure, Commissioner Gamility. Rachel Morcone, Senior Planner with the Regional Transportation Commission in Santa Cruz, and I'm happy to provide an update on some of the activities that we've been doing around this great transportation corridor. So as a reminder, the Regional Transportation Commission, with the assistance of voter-approved Proposition 116 funds and State Transportation Improvement Program funds, purchased the Santa Cruz Branch Rail Line after about a decade of negotiations with Union Pacific in 2012. And since 2012, the commission has been increasing freight service on the rail corridor through our short line operators. We have made a major structural replacement of one of the railroad bridges at La Selva Beach area. Our voters have approved Measure D back in 2016, which includes $50 million for rail infrastructure, railroad infrastructure. Since our purchase of the rail line in 2012, we have also increased excursion services on the rail corridor, with the exception of this past winter due to storm damage, which plagued the entire state. It also hit some sections of our rail corridor, so we were not able to operate those passenger services this past winter, though freight rail service has continued this entire time. Our commission's also done a rail transit feasibility study, which piggybacks off of our initial major transportation investment corridor study, which we had done in the late 1990s, that looked at all of our parallel corridors where the vast majority of our population lives. Our rail corridor, over half of our population lives within a mile of our rail corridor. We really do see it as an outstanding transportation asset, and our board continues to have the policy that we are building both a rail and trail within this corridor, and our board has not taken any actions to abandon that rail commitment. There are members of our community who are actively interested in seeing removal of the tracks for many reasons. Some of those might be categorized as not in my backyard reasons, but our board continues to move forward with making investments in the actual tracks to maintain rail service there, and we are, well, it's not imminent that we'll be able to provide rail transit service on the rail corridor. We are really excited about all the opportunities that both high-speed rail and extension of the Capitol Corridor from Silicon Valley down to Salinas through Pajaro, which is part of our rail corridor, will provide for encouraging expanded transit use on this corridor in the future.
Well, I noticed that you conducted a rail transit study in December of 2015, so that's 2.5 years ago.
Sure.
And the construction costs range from 23 million to 48 million. Are you just sitting on that study, or what's the status in 2.5 years?
Sure. As part of the Measure D sales tax measure negotiations with the community, there was community consensus that that the community and our board would like to do a little additional environmental and economic analysis of different uses of the corridor before moving forward with rail transit service.
So what's the status of that study?
That study was completed in 2015. It looked at a range starting at about 20 different rail scenarios, looking at, what transit travel times would be, ridership numbers, ongoing operation and maintenance costs, upfront capital costs. The actual upfront capital costs for upgrading the entire rail line from Santa Cruz to Watsonville to a Class 1 would be upwards of $100 million, actually. And so our community is excited that through cap and trade and Senate Bill 1 and other federal programs, that there might be opportunities to partner with the state in the future to pursue making some of those upgrades. Our rail transit study also looked at some smaller capital investments that only went from Santa Cruz to Aptos, which currently it's 8 miles, and at this time of day takes an hour to drive that 8 miles. And so there's definitely community recognition that we don't have enough room to widen the highway, and that this is the alternate route that we really need to make sure we preserve for transportation uses.
Well, I'm concerned that we live up to the intent of Prop 116. So, I would appreciate it maybe if you could update our staff on the freight movement and how much freight's being moved, how often, et cetera, through that corridor.
Sure. And bringing it back to the project that's before you, this project's ready to go to construction this summer. From the center line of the railroad tracks to the edge of the trail is 21 feet, which is well beyond what is required spacing between the tracks and the trail. And so this trail is being constructed, not on top of the spot that the
No,
tracks are, but definitely adjacent.
Rachel, I'm all for
Yeah.
the trail. That's not the issue, but the money
I
was
just want
also
to
supposed to
affirm
be
we're
spent.
not taking out the tracks. We are building a trail.
You better
adjacent to
not
the
take out the tracks. And I know we have the same situation in Monterey, because we provided a great deal of money to buy right away for the tracks that lead into Monterey. So maybe Mara out there can give me an update sometime in the future.
Mike Zeller is in the, no, I'm gonna- from TMC, but. all
Thank
right.
you.
You're welcome.
But staff will get some more information for you, Commissioner, on the future of that rail line.
So this is an action item, so we would need a,
Move
So-
approval.
We have a motion by Commissioner Gilmetti, a second by Commissioner Alvarado. Any further discussion? All in favor? Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining for the record? The motion carries. Okay, we're going to keep working a little bit here. We're going to go to item number, 61? I'm sorry, I was jumping ahead here. I was going to the 80s already. Not yet.
we got to live through the 60s first.
Let's do number 61, Garth.
Sure. Commissioners, tab 61 is an action item. This is the final EIR for the new alignment of the State Route 58 and State Route 99 through, near the city of Bakersfield. Caltrans has adopted a statement of overriding considerations, finding that the benefits outweigh the impacts. Staff recommends your approval.
Battery-operated trains or hydrogen.
We have a motion by Commissioner Paul V. We have a second by Commissioner Tavaloni. Any discussion on this item? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining for the record? Motion carries. Okay, now we'll go to item 62.
Yes, Commissioners. Item 62 is a request to directly negotiate an airspace lease with the Vincent DePaul Management Corporation. This airspace lease, or this lease, refers to a motel that's built in the smack dab in the middle of a interchange in San Diego. Vincent DePaul would like to acquire the motel from the current operator of the motel and the airspace lease from Caltrans and convert this motel to housing for homeless people. Staff believes that it is in the best interest of the state to provide this negotiation, approve this negotiation, because this would go a long way to solving some of the homeless problems in the San Diego area. In order for a direct negotiation to be approved, I need a unanimous vote from the commission. So staff recommends that you approve this direct negotiation.
We have a motion by Commissioner Tavaloni, a second by Commissioner Dunn. Commissioner Gilman?
No, I'm going to be in favor of the motion. I just want to make sure in the lease negotiation that there's a guarantee that the motel gets renovated.
We will make sure that the department has those conditions in the finally negotiated lease, when that lease comes back to the commission for approval.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining for the record? Motion carries. Okay, we'll go on to the next item.
Yes, Commissioners. Item 63.
63.
Item 63 is a request to approve a directly negotiated lease with the San Francisco Marin Food Bank. The commission the prior meeting approved the direct negotiations. Now this is a lease coming back for commission approval. This is a 50-year lease at fair market value. Staff recommends that you approve this lease.
Move approval. Second.
Oh, I think that was a tie. Let's see.
I'm happy to be the second.
Commissioner, we have a motion by Commissioner Gilmetti, a second by Commissioner Gardino. Any discussion on this? All in favor? Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining for the record? Motion carries.
Madam Chair, I just want to thank Stephen Mahler, who has worked so closely with the food bank and their team to make sure that this worked out in a way that they could continue in their core mission, and the state was doing what it should be doing as well.
Well, as a trustee from another food bank, I too appreciate the work that our food banks do in helping to end hunger across our nation. So happy to be a part of that. We're going to try to do a little more work today. I know I'm between you and the bar, but okay, we're going to move to item number 80 if we can. So Teresa, I think you're up next.
Commissioners, item 80 is an action item. This is a STIP allocation for a locally administered STIP project on the state highway system. Please note there is a replacement book item for this item. The Lassen County is requesting an allocation of $200,000 for the Southeast Gateway project. The agency is requesting $80,000 more than what it is programmed. Please, this is not typical, however, because this is a very small jurisdiction and they have no other means to cover the full cost, it's reasonable to request at the time of allocation. They did attempt to do it during the 2018 STIP, but because this is not in accordance with STIP guidelines, staff did recommend for them to do it at the time of allocation. Staff has reviewed this request and finds it consistent with STIP guidelines and the program. Staff recommends your approval.
Second.
We have a motion by Commissioner Tavaloni, a second by Commissioner Alvarado. Is there any discussion on this item? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining for the record? Motion carries. Thank you, Teresa. You're up again. 81,
Okay.
Teresa, you're
Item
still up.
81 is an action item. This is a financial allocation request for $4,525,000 for 6 STIP projects. Staff has reviewed this request and finds it consistent with STIP guidelines and the program. Staff recommends your approval.
We have a motion by Commissioner Tavaloni, a second by Commissioner Dunn. Is there any discussion on this item? All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining for the record? Motion carries. Okay, we will go to item 82. Teresa.
Item
you're up again.
82 is an action item. This is a STIP advancement allocation request of $15,557,000 for the 680 southbound HOV lane gap closure in Contra Costa County, program in 1819. Staff has reviewed this request and finds it consistent with STIP guidelines and the program. Staff recommends your approval.
Second.
We have a motion by Commissioner Gilmetti. We have a chorus of seconds. Will Commissioner Tavaloni second? And is there any discussion on this item? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? For the record, the motion carries. Okay. Item 83.
Item 83 is an action item. This is a Federal Border Infrastructure Program financial allocation request for $4,500,000 for the Cesar Chavez Boulevard widening and improvement project in Imperial County. Staff has reviewed this request and finds it consistent with STIP guidelines. Staff recommends your approval.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Tavaloni, a second by Commissioner Dunn. Is there any discussion on this item? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Motion carries. Thank you, Teresa. Okay, we're going to go to item 84. Matthew.
Thank you. Commissioners, item 84 is an action item to approve 4 separate local partnership program allocations totaling $1,319,000. The 4 recipient agencies meet the matching requirements for each respective project. Staff has reviewed this request and it is consistent with local partnership program guidelines and the adopted program. Therefore, staff recommends your approval.
We have a motion by Commissioner Dunn, a second by Commissioner Tavaloni. Any discussion? All in favor? Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining for the record? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, we're going to go now to 85.
Commissioners, item 85 is an action item allocation requesting $795,000 from Proposition 1B for one project on State Route 99. Commission staff has reviewed the request. It is consistent with the previously approved baseline agreement, and staff recommends your approval.
We have a motion by Commissioner Alvarado, a second by Commissioner Tavaloni. Any discussion on this item? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Any opposed? Anybody abstaining for the record? Motion carries. Okay, you guys are going to love me tomorrow, but we're going to hit item number 90, please. Lori?
Commissioners, this is an action item. There's one change to this item. Project number 5 has received the right-of-way certification and is ready for allocation. With that change noted, this item is to approve an allocation of $28,154,000 for 25 ATP projects. 15 of these allocations are being funded with SB1 funds, including the City of Buena Park Explore Beach Boulevard Go Human event in Orange County. Staff has reviewed these requests. They are consistent with ATP guidelines and the adopted program. Therefore, staff recommends your approval.
We have a motion by Commissioner Gardino, a second by Commissioner Dunn. Is there any discussion on this item?
I just want to say how much I appreciate these safe routes to schools.
Paul, how about putting your mic on to say that?
Thank you to these agencies for the safe routes to school projects that they're getting done. Thank you.
All right, we have a motion on the floor. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Motion carries. 91, Lori.
Commissioners, items 91 and 92 are advanced ATP allocations. They are action items to approve advance allocations of $2,366,000 for 5 ATP projects programmed in future fiscal years. Staff has reviewed these requests. They are consistent with ATP guidelines, the adopted program, and the ATP policy on project amendments and advanced project allocations. Therefore, staff recommends your approval.
We have a motion on the floor by Commissioner Gardino and a second by Commissioner Paul, I think, did that. So any discussion?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I would just like to make it clear, I believe that Lori took 2 items together, agenda items 91 and 92, so if your actions pertain to both. Thank you.
Thank you. We're teamwork here, getting this done. So the motion is voting on 91 and 92. So all in favor? Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining for the record? Motions, plural, 91 and 92 pass. Thank you. Okay, extension of time, Lori, 93.
Okay, Commissioners, item 93 is an action item. This is for project allocation time extensions for 4 ATP projects. Staff has reviewed the extension requests, and they are consistent with ATP guidelines and recommends their approval as shown on the yellow time extension table.
We have a motion by Commissioner Dunn, a second by Commissioner Tavaloni. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Motion carries. Thank you. We will move to 94. Rick?
Commissioners, item 94 is a request to extend the start time of expenditures for 4 shop pre-construction support phases on 2 projects. Staff recommends the approval of these extensions as noticed on the yellow staff recommendations.
We have a motion by Commissioner Dunn, a second by Commissioner Tavaloni. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, call for the vote. All in favor? Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Hearing none, motion carries. 94. Oh, wait, we just did 94, we're up to 95, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioners, item 95 is a request to extend the period of contract award for 18 SHOP projects. This request is consistent with the requirements contained in the commission adopted SHOP guidelines. Please notice that there were a couple of projects via the change list that were withdrawn from this item. Commission staff recommends Commission approve the extension amounts as presented in the staff recommendations.
We have a motion by Commissioner Tavaloni. We have a second by Commissioner Alvarado. Is there any discussion on this?
So we're all working off of this.
Yes, the yellow. So we're good? We're current? Okay, ready for the vote? All in favor? Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Hearing none? Motion carries. Okay, we will go to item 96.
Commissioners, item 96 is an action item. This is a request to extend the period of expenditure for a locally administered project, the State Route 88 Pine Grove Corridor Improvement. This is a STIP project in Amador County. They are requesting for a 20-month time extension. Staff has reviewed this request and finds it reasonable, and it's in accordance with STIP guidelines. Staff recommends your approval.
We have a motion by Commissioner Tavaloni, a second by Commissioner Dunn. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, well, guys, we bounced around, but we got a lot of good work done. I would like to offer, if there's any public comment, just out of respect of a 2-day hearing, if anybody's traveled today and wants to come forward, you're welcome to do so. If not, I guess you could comment at the bar. Okay, well, I just want to thank OCTA once again for their hospitality and apologize. The microphone issue was my fat fingers. It was not the equipment. So you have a beautiful dais and we appreciate being here. So with that motion.